Hi there. Okay, ready, set, class. Where is the class? Montesquieu. There's the Montesquieu. Well, welcome to our makeup session. I know everyone said they would. Oh yeah, problems. Okay, I understand. This ends up today. We're ending up. This ends our coverage of Montesquieu Spirit of the Laws. Today, part 6, we'll look at the last book. Part 6 deals with the last 5 books. Now, book 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. Now, what's so interesting about this, well, first of all, 27 will be the only book that has one chapter. Now, this chapter is what? Let's be honest, this chapter is a killer. This one book has only one chapter, but the chapter is 44 paragraphs. So it is basically what is about chapter 27? Book 27. Book 27 is about the origin of and revolution of the Roman laws. Now, this is basically his summary of his book on the Romans. Montesquieu wrote a book called the Consolation or the Consideration of the Rome on the Romans, and this book is his kind of history of Rome. Now, in this book, what he does is he summarizes these 44 paragraphs, the key findings of Roman history that he thinks is very relevant to understand the preconditions of the French thing. Now, what is part 6? Part 6, at one level, appears to be his attempt to kind of deal with the French monarchy. Understand? This is the most French-centered thing. So therefore, he needs to address the Romans only in order to prepare the way for what will become the French monarchy. So that's why at one level you would say, well, hasn't he, this is the book where he gives the history. Okay? Every one of these books, except the book 25, the middle book of these 5 books, right? Look at 29. 29 is not a kind of a history of what he's doing. Everything else is kind of a history of him going into the history of the French monarchy, in the background of the French monarchy, and the connection of the laws of the French monarchy. So 27 will begin this discussion of Roman right and the Roman laws and the Roman structures by which all the political history of Rome, the Republic, then and move from the Republic. Because remember, it is the Republic who will conquer Gaul. Remember that. It will be the Republic who will have its fights with the Spanish in the Spanish territories with the Carthaginians. In other words, it will be Greek colonies and Roman Italian colonies that will shape the fight over Iberia and then southern what we call southern Greece, Marseilles, and these areas of the Mediterranean. It is a power fight between the Carthaginians, the Greeks, under the control of Macedonia, the Macedonian monarchy, the Macedonian or different rulers of the dynasties of the Macedonians. The Egyptian pharaohs. Remember, the pharaohs of Egypt now are Greek. Okay, the Ptolemies. In other words, Alexander conquers everything, right? Yes. And what happens when Alexander dies is the generals take over the parts. So therefore, it was Persia, a Greek. Actually, Alexander often brought in locals, except so therefore, what happened in Syria was 3 Greek generals take over the Assyria, Egypt, and Macedon. Okay, eastward areas they will remain under. What happens often will be a Greek general, and a Greek family intermarrying with the locals, a Persian or something like this, will then create dynasties over there. So therefore, a Greek, one of the generals of Alexander, because his conquest, will break up the conquest into this. As he said would happen, right? A monarchy will collapse, the fight. Remember what he said about in book 1 and book 2 about monarchies. A monarchy has to be moderate in size. So if it's too big, what will happen is it will either become a despotism if it maintains it will be forced, in order to keep control of everything, it will be either forced to be despotic, or if it doesn't become despotic, what will happen is it'll break up. It'll break up in parts. Okay, so that what ends up happening with the discussion here is that, well, what happens is that Rome rise to power comes in light of this competition between Carthage, a very powerful, it was the Phoenician colony that survived and grew powerful, Carthage, a major commercial power, Macedon, which is Greece, Egypt, major power, Assyria, which is not that big of a power, it's more land-based, it's not really these things. So therefore, it's Athens, and it's in other words, the Greek Macedonians and the Greek cities. They're still it's more kind of a league where the king is in charge and the cities are kind of subordinate, but then he lets them do commerce. Okay, so Athens and Corinth are doing massive commerce. They're competing with the Phoenicians. And the Egyptians are not a commercial people. They are commercial people, but they're not necessarily sailors. They are producers of grain, crops, and things like this. So therefore, the Phoenicians and the Romans will have their people, not the Romans themselves, but one of their client states, the Marseilles, is a commercial people. It's a chain. So their ships, they will make the ships that will do trade. And they will all be dealing with the wheat from Egypt. Okay? So now what's happening is there's a new wheat competition. This is much of where Carthage gets its wheat from, not from Egypt, when it went to Egypt, but also it's producing wheat in Iberia, food and stuff in Iberia. So therefore, Spain, Rome will start going first to Gaul, then the Republic. This is the Republic, okay? This is before the height of the empire. It will be the Republic which destroys it will be under the Republic that the empire. The empire is created under the Republic. It will conquer all of Italy. It will conquer. Before it conquers Gaul, it will conquer Greece. And twice it'll conquer Greece. So 3 Macedonian wars.
The Italian.
Now they unify Italy first.
Yeah.
They don't really unify, but they conquer. They get their control over Italy first.
But who conquers them?
The Romans conquer them. The Romans unify, basically conquer all the other cities and all the other cities of Italy. Okay, they basically do so by making the cities either submit. They submit to Roman rule. And that the kings, that the leaders, if they have, in other words, most of these cities will not have kings. They'll have, therefore, the ruling elite will be made Roman citizens, and everyone else will be either subordinate citizens, citizens with no status, non-Romans. They will not be Romans. They will be subjects. In other words, therefore, in the city, a subject city, a city subjected to Roman agreement would be an agreement that Rome will protect it, but it gives men if it needs it. If Rome needs men, they'll send men to fight for Rome. They will give money, tribute, and things like this, but they will be able to govern themselves. The leading citizens will be Romans. They'll have Roman citizenship, but they won't participate. A Roman citizen is, unless you're in the Senate, they're not going to get Senate representation. They'll be like Roman plebes.
Yeah, they're just going to govern themselves, but for Rome.
Yes, and that they will govern themselves. They will rule over that things and govern Rome. And that Rome will not necessarily send a consul there, proconsul. See, Rome would send a proconsul when they don't trust them. When a Roman leader is ruling over them, where they don't allow them, like this will happen under the Republic when it conquers places like when they conquer the Jewish territories. They don't trust them. They may make a deal with Pharaoh. Herod, the king Herod of Judea, they make a deal. But the other areas where they didn't have a king and they were just there was no organized king. The Romans just conquered it. It was under their rule. Where there was no political unit that would they form an alliance or subordinate agreement with it, a king or a princely state or a city, that they would form a social relation, a societas with. The Romans would then just rule by a proconsul. Okay, they'll have soldiers and they'll let but then they'll rule. They'll have a proconsul acting as the administrator of the city. Right. That's how the Romans operate. A proconsul has external authority. It's like a consul has authority within Rome and within the whole situations. The Republic has 2 consuls every 2 years. For every year there's a consul. There's 2 consuls. They elect 2 consuls, 1 year, every year, and they're executive. They run the army, they control things, but one can veto the other. So if one doesn't like what the other one does, nothing happens. Okay, a proconsul has multi-year authority abroad, but he has no jurisdiction in Rome.
Okay, so these 2
are different jurisdictions.
Yes, but
Rome, a consul rules within the Roman Republic over the whole Republic.
Yeah.
And has a total jurisdiction for 1 year. But there's another one that can cancel his jurisdiction out.
Only in Rome.
No. Even outside.
Even outside.
But
all those small cities that
under the authority of the Roman, when it deals with when Roman has authority over it.
Yeah.
If Rome wants to renegotiate the agreement, the consuls can do it. The Senate is the Senate, who is who members of the higher class join. There's no representation in that sense. It's the elites themselves will select members of the senatorial class. So the Roman Republic is a very odd thing. The people only get a negative vote. The people get to vote for consul, right, and other officers they vote they vote basically to say we like you or we don't like you. They don't have no say in nomination. The senators will nominate, and the senators are self-selecting of the upper class. They're the peoples of the upper class. Usually one family can only send one of the members of that per there. The senators will select themselves. Usually the consuls sometimes will introduce, but the thing about this is a consul can recommend someone to be included in the Senate, but the Senate would have to agree to it. Okay, the senators themselves by majority vote would agree to that new person coming in. Okay.
So the people
have no say in the Senate.
The people can only say if they don't like them.
And they don't like the people the Senate appoints.
Okay.
They vote by and also they vote by centuries. They vote by centuries. Every town or village in class is divided into groups of 100, and they'll vote. In Roman rules, you don't have secret ballot. You vote by moving into a way. The group of 100 will then divide. Yes, no, and they'll count by the divide per centuries.
Okay.
So therefore, there's a lot of peer pressure. Everyone knows how you vote.
And you kind of have a voting power, but also it's split, so not really.
It's not. In other words, it's divided in a way to prevent it's divided by region, part of the town, part of the city.
Okay.
So therefore, they divide it into centuries. So therefore, and also the other thing is the people can elect every year. They elect tributes, up to 5. Tributes are it's a sacred thing. If you're elected tribute, you can't be touched. It's a yearly appointment that once you're elected, you have to go through this ritual and you're made holy. And that what happens is if anyone touches you, it's a crime.
Like actually just touch you, or like
if they try to harm you.
You're right.
They can once your time is up, then they can kill you. But if they killed you, if they did anything to you while you were still in office, it would be you would anger the gods. The argument is. In fact, this is why what happens is they strike. You know, the reason why Julius Caesar will come and invade Rome is because Anthony is physically attacked when he tries to stop, because the tribute is allowed. A tribute is allowed to veto a resolution of the Senate.
Okay.
The tribute, any one tribute, can stand up to the Senate. If the Senate's making a bill, we don't like it. The tribute, the people elect tributes. They nominate, they themselves nominate, and they themselves elect. But the tribute, only power tributes have, because there can be at least two, as many as 2 and up to 5, and any one of them can veto the act of the legislature, the Senate.
As a tribute, it is in your interest to veto what
the people don't like.
People don't like, and if you don't veto them, then after a year you're probably gonna get.
No, and also you don't tend to re-elect tributes.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people doing it, therefore. And in fact, usually tributes are of the. Sometimes the people do not always. Tributes are not always of the popular class. They often pick people of the middle and noble classes to be tributes. Okay. In other words, but they're usually not senators. Okay. Those who they may be upper class people, but they're not necessarily senators in this sense. And that's why we have to always understand that distinction in Rome. So this is what the whole point about this. Now, what's so important about this is how the Roman law changes everything, because of the way the Roman law. Remember, what happens with the Roman law, the Roman Empire, that's the political Rome. The Roman law is the history of law. Remember, the plebes. The plebes got the tribute only by threatening to divide the city. Okay, that's the famous story. So therefore, the Republican institutions became the powerful thing. They grew. It was with the Republic that the empire became. But once they got the empire in the well, once they conquered everything, then what happened was the creation of massive wealth. And they had slaves. What happened was as slavery became the dominant economy. Because what happens is that the very wealthy, the military people got huge tracts of land, conquered lots of slaves. They put the slaves into their plantation system, and the economics. And actually, what did it was the Second Punic War and the way Hannibal pillaged most of Italy. What ended up happening was that everyone fled into the cities. And then after war, often instead of going back to farming, they sold the land to wealthy soldiers and wealthy people who conquered all that stuff, made these great. After conquering Greece and conquering this, they came back. They bought huge sites of land. People who didn't want to, they sold their farms for money, wealth, or something like this. And then what happened was instead of doing small farms, they created these big plantations of slave economy. From the slaves of everywhere, slaves from Egypt, slaves from of Carthage, of North Africa, where Carthage was, slaves, people, they conquered the Iberian people, they conquered the Gauls. This is okay. It is with the conquest of Gaul that Caesar gets his money. Now, when you say Gaul, that doesn't sound like it's not. But there's lots of wealth there. It's called land. It's the land. It's the agricultural crops, the populations, the slaves you could have gotten.
What is Gaul?
Gaul is France,
right?
Southern part of France.
Okay.
The Gallic part. This is the real center of France. That's Gaul. And it is the contact with the German troops and the conflict with the German tribes. Okay, this is the basis of this. The empire comes up from Caesar. Caesar's conquest of the Republic. Caesar is killed. This creates the first civil war, where Caesar destroys the Republic. He becomes dictatorship. Okay, the Romans have this emergency office called dictator.
Yeah.
The dictator is a temporary office. Because why? Because this, if the consuls dispute and there's a big crisis, and the consuls can't agree.
They just appoint one person.
They'll appoint one person as long as the crisis, until the crisis is over, or 6 months. And then they renowned. So this was dictatorship power meant. This was the dictator was a temporary office where he had total power because of the emergency situation. Okay. Now the Romans in this regard had very strict rules about this. Now, of course, the Romans also had rules about families, the culture about family power. All these customs, habits, and rules became law. Remember, the Roman law was odd because it wasn't written. It was when the people demanded law. They created the decemvirs, and the 10 men who ruled over the decemvirate. They ruled the dictators over that, and that was so bad. Then it led to a revolution to remove them. But they got their code. They finally were given the code, only through but even then they modified it, okay? And then after that, then every moment there were rules about this. And then came Caesar, right? Caesar got power at first because of Julius wanted, okay, it was basically an agreement between three powerful people. It was Julius Caesar, Pompey Maximus, the conqueror of. Pompey became famous because he pacified the pirates. He stopped the piracy in the Mediterranean, so that helped everything. Second thing he conquered today, which we call Jerusalem. Okay, he conquered Assyria and Jerusalem, modern day Judea, and he also did that to stop. That's where the piracy. That's where most of the pirates were. Okay. The pirates are hanging out there. So he became famous. He became wealthy and powerful from his legions. In other words, what happened before this. There was a reform of the army, which allowed generals to pay their soldiers. Before, soldiers were always paid by the republic. Now, what they could do is the generals could, if they got money in loot, they could provide the means to reward their soldiers, and therefore these armies would be their private armies. These were the Marsyas reforms that happened before this. Then there was a first civil war between the Marsian reformers who fought for the people, and then Sulla. Sulla defeats the reformers, but Sulla is dictator for like 10 years. And Sulla brings the reforms. He tried to moderate the Senate. He introduced a whole bunch of new people, knights into the Senate. He expanded the Senate. He moderated it. But he was acting as dictator for 10 years.
Caesar.
Not Caesar. This is Sulla. Before a decade before, a century before, half a century before. It is young Caesar seeing Sulla and opposing Sulla. And then after Sulla falls, the senators became more jealous. The old Senate wanted to preserve their power. They feared the people. Caesar got his support by favoring the people. So the history of Rome led us to the problem of Caesar and Gaul. Caesar gave him lots of money. What happened was that these three people, there's Crassus, who was a very wealthy slave owner. The first triumvirate. What is a triumvirate? The triumvirate is a private relationship between three powerful people. Two of them have private armies. Caesar has his army from his Gaul campaign, has an army loyal to him. Pompey has an army loyal to him from his time in the pacifying of the sea and also conquering Jerusalem. And then last but not least is Crassus. Now Crassus, his greatest achievement is the crushing of the Spartacus insurrection. He becomes a hero when he saves the Republic from the slave rebellion, right? But he doesn't do this with a private army. He does this with an army of the Republic. In other words, it's not an army. It's the army of the Republic, and therefore it's not his army. It is just the normal. Because once the was over, his control. They had no loyalty to him. He didn't pay them anything. What he wanted to do, what happened was this: every year there's a new election for council. The rule was this: at least one of the tribunate would always be a council. So Caesar's men would elect Crassus's supporters, his fellow rich people, and Pompey would always ensure that one or two of them were always consul, and the other one would be out making money. Now, when it was time for Crassus to go make money, right, he decides to go for an adventure in the Parthians. He gets killed. Only now the problem happens. The problem is Julius Caesar and Pompey Maximus. Pompey has a problem because Pompey is married to Julius Caesar's sister. She dies. Therefore, the thing that bonded them together now is lost. And Pompey joins with the senatorial faction against Caesar. They're going to ban Caesar. And that's when the Senate vote to condemn Caesar happened, Antony was attacked Antony, who was a tribute, was going to stop the vote. He was physically attacked and prevented from stopping the vote. The vote condemned Caesar. Caesar brings his whole army across the Rubicon, which is the border, that little river that says that Roman soldiers can't cross.
Yeah.
A general and his army cannot bring his soldiers to there.
Yeah.
He can't even wear his armor, his red robe and that. He has to wear his white toga. Anyone in the armed uniform cannot cross in that jurisdiction unless you're a guard of the jurisdiction. So when Caesar crosses that with his army, that's the beginning of the Second Civil War. Now, he defeats Pompey and Cato in the Senate. Then what happens? He becomes dictator. First, they flee. As he comes back and conquers Rome, the senators flee Rome. They abandon Rome. Caesar takes control of Rome, creates a new senate. Well, kills these senators that didn't like him. He had Antony kill everyone, and then create a new senate that's his. Make him dictator. And then he and Antony go attack the other senators. They eventually defeat everyone, and then he comes back defeating the Romans, the Civil War, gives himself another tribute, which is unheard of. You shouldn't give a tribune for civil. Then what happens is everyone thinks Caesar's going to make himself king. Then what happens? They kill Caesar in the second. Then the second triumvirate is the fight between the three. It's Octavius, Antony, which at this point, and the second this fight between Antony, Octavius, and what's the other guy? This nobody who becomes a third party. They make the second tribunate. Okay, what ends up happening is Antony gets Egypt in Greece. Caesar gets that, and the other guy gets Spain. The other guy basically, he just disappears because he's a nobody. He doesn't have. And what happens is the problem becomes the grain. There's not enough grain coming from Egypt, and Antony becomes Cleo's, and declares that he's the real emperor and that he wants to be God. He calls himself a god. He calls himself even king, which is a naughty, and proclaims that he and Cleopatra, when Antony dies, his will he proclaims that Cleopatra's son with Caesar will be made emperor over the Romans. And this is what leads to the fight with Octavius. Octavian defeats Caesar. That all power rests with Octavian. Octavian seizes total control over Rome. And what Octavian does is he becomes Augustus. His name changes. And what does Augustus do? Is he takes all the titles. He's the tribune of the people. He is both consuls. He's imperial general. He's all the major office and dictator too. Now, but poor Augustus hates this after a while, and it's silly kind of him being all the offices. So he creates a new title, and that is Principatus. Principatus. And what does Principatus means? It means first citizen. Now, why is this important? Well, this is the whole history of the Rome. This is what he goes in the Civil War. He talks about the Roman laws and how they had found this about women, how Roman law changes about this and how this affects. This is the background by which shapes what will happen in Europe, okay? Particularly in Gaul, in the areas of Gaul under Roman influence. This was Roman law that will survive the collapse of the Roman Empire, will be the basis under Justinian's Institute and the institutions of the law of the Roman Empire. This will be the law that shapes the world that survives the collapse of the empire. Okay, right? And that now the second book, the origins of and this is great. This is another poem. He begins a poem. He has a poem from Metamorphosis here. Book 28 is the next poem. He gives a poem right at the beginning of the book from Ovid Metamorphosis. My imagination brings me to speak of forms, changing into new bodies. Okay, what is this? Then the origin of revolution in civil laws among the French. Right. First of all, what you have to understand about this. You understand the name by calling it France. You've already made a very important claim.
That it exists?
No. That it's German. Because the Franks are a Germanic tribe. In other words, it's not called Galatia. It's not called the Gallic people. The Gallic people, this is what was the southern France, the Gauls. Remember, there's a cartoon, there's Asterix, and there's a famous...
Yeah, the Gallics.
The Gallics, right? This is the French. What is France? Is it Gallic? Is it Gaul? Or is it Frank? The name itself says, no, it's German.
And the French are basically German, but they were separated by a river and started talking in a different...
Nope.
No?
Mm-mm. They were Germanic tribes that were Romanized. And therefore they adopted the Roman Latin. They spoke Latin and Latin language, and as Latin became vulgarized and formed, and then it merged with the Gallic words, and it produced the difference between Northern dialect France and Southern dialect France. But it's still Latin, right? You understand? It's Latin. It's a Latinate. But that's because the Latins forced the German tribes to speak Latin.
And it created
modern French. Come on, think of this. What are the Normans? The Normans are Vikings, not Norwegians, but Danes and Norwegians who come into northern France, who then the French monarchy makes an agreement with, that they intermarry with French, they adopt French language and French culture, but they still maintain Norman behaviors, okay? Okay, the Normans are the same thing. This is therefore they surrender into French culture, French identity. So that what is French identity? This is Germanic identity. That's the dirty secret. So therefore, the most important book to understand the Germans is Tacitus's book, the Germanica, about the German. Tacitus, the great Roman general, the historian of the late empire, writes a book about the Germans. And he says that the difference is the Romans have civilization, but they're not free. It's the Germans have this spirit of freedom, this freedom of. In other words, it's the forest is this vitality that Rome, when Tacitus is writing, is a civilized place, but it's burdened, it's overwhelming, it's starving, it's stifling, it's weak, it's dying. And that the vital thing is German. That's why some people call the Tacitus's Germanicus the most dangerous book, because it creates this that all European vitality comes from German tribes. But and Montesquieu is a Tacitus. Montesquieu accepts Tacitus's position here. That this is the German. It is that what defines France will be this Germanic spirit. This spirit. This is what it will. Yes, it will be understood through a Latin lens, right? The difference between the Franks are Germanic people who will cross over and accept the Latinization. They accept the authority of they have accepted everything in the Latin structures. In other words, it's the Franks the Franks that say that's why it's very weird, because places like the center of the Frankish dynasty is someplace like Frankfurt. But there's two Frankfurts, Frankfurt am Main, Frankfurt the Oder. The Frankfurt the Oder is next to this side. Frankfurt the Main and the River Main. The River Oder, the River Main. This is the realm of the Frankish court. The center of the Frankish court would be Frankfurt on the Main. That's where all the French kings will get their titles and their lines. And the biggest French king will be Charlemagne, who establishes the Roman Empire. He claims the title of Roman Emperor. Now he does this, he can do this, because the Pope will agree to it.
Right.
And he does agree. Now why does the Pope agree? Because his dad, Pippin, takes an army and liberates the Pope from that, gives the Pope control over the papal territories, all the duchies around that. Before Pippin comes in and liberates the Pope and conquers the Roman barons, the Roman barons basically keep the Pope prisoner. Whatever Roman baronal family decides who's Pope, that's the new Pope. Okay. That the Pope is basically at this point a prisoner of the barons, the landed families who control the Roman area. Okay, what Pippin does, he conquers them, destroys them, and gives the land and the power to the Pope, the Papal States, and therefore the Pope becomes a prince at this point. But the deal is the Pope is freed and given power and money over these territories. Right? Being Pope means controlling these territories. All these lands are now yours. You're a fieful lord, and all these dukes and barons owe you land money, loyalty. Therefore, what do? The deal is you make my son emperor. And
he's a prisoner and a prince at the same time?
No, he's no longer a prince anymore. He was never a prince until Pippin frees him.
Right.
That once the Pope becomes freed by Pippin, the deal is that the Pope will now be the head of the Papal States. He will be the de facto prince of all the Papal States, all the territory, lands, and titles under that. Okay. And therefore, that is the control. And that's the whole idea. Now, the Frank is here. The Frankish idea is that we call the Salic law, right? The Franks left their country. They had the Salic laws drawn up by the sages of their nation. When the tribes of the Reprodutan Franks under Clovis, that of the Silesian Franks, it preserved its usages. And Theodotus, king of Austrasia, had written them down. There collected the usages of the Bavarians and the Armenians, which the dependencies of his kingdom. As Germany was weakened by the departure of so many of his people, the Franks, after conquering what laid in the front of them, took a step backwards and brought their domain into the forest of their fathers. This is likely that the codes of the Thuringians was given the name of Theodoric, and this is why they were lost. I think he says that the Thagorians were also his subjects, as the Phoenicians were the subjects of Charles Martel. Right? Charles Martel will be a king, a Frankish king, who does what? He will stop. Martel will stop the Muslim invasion from Spain. Okay. Charles Martel will be the great French monarch, the French political leader, Frankish king. The Frankish kings are controlling France. They conquer all this. They conquer everything in front of them that was Rome. And then they go back into the forest and get more control. And therefore they collect usages from Bavaria and the Armenians, right? They're connected. Because Germany was the Franks, the German part of that was weakened. After they conquered what was in front of them, they went back into the forest and regained control. So therefore, that's the thing. This is this idea. The Thugarians were also on his subjects. Thus, the Pharasians were subjected by Charles Martel. This is that region, and Pepin, the last. Their laws are no earlier than these princes. Okay, right? Charlemagne, who was the first to overcome the Saxons. So all of these are different German tribes, the Theroic, the Pharasians, Saxons, gave them the laws we have. So it's Charlemagne who then conquers the Saxons, gave them the laws that formed Germany and France. Okay? One has only to read these last two codes to see that they become the hands of the conquerors. When the Visigoths, the Burgundians, and Lombards founded kingdoms, they had their laws written, not in order to make the conquered people follow their usages, but in order to follow them themselves. Okay? In other words, laws were written not because forced the conquered people. In other words, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, and Lombardians who founded their kingdoms, right? They were these were conquerors, right? These were invaders who conquered those regions. And they made written laws. Why? Not so that they imposed it on the people, but to follow them themselves. It was not only for the people they conquered, but for themselves. In the Salic and Reputarian laws, and those of the Alamene, Bavarians, Trungunians, and Phoenicians, there is an admirable simplicity. They showed their original roughness and a spirit that was not at all weakened by different spirits. So notice the spirit, weakened spirit, what is authentic. That these Germanic tribes don't get weakened. They get strengthened by the Frankish things. They changed little because these peoples, with the exception of the Franks, stayed in Germany. So the Franks leave Germany, go in France. But all the other tribes they conquer and they stay there, and they stay in Germany. The Franks even founded a great part of their empire there. Thus their laws were entirely German. Remember, the Franks are the basis by which France emerges. Remember, that's their name. Their name, France, right, is German, it's Frankreich. The German word for France is Frankreich, the Reich of the Franks. Frankreich. Okay, it's important to understand that. Austria is what? Come on, what is Austria? What is the name in German? What do you call Austria?
Österreich.
Eastern Reich. Reich is empire. You understand? And Germany is Deutschland, the land of the Germans. Okay.
So what's the difference between the Deutsch and the Frank?
Not the Deutsch are simply the Deutsch are universal. The Franks are one of the Deutsch.
Right. So the Franks are like one of the tribes of the Deutsch.
Yes. Okay. As were the Burgundian. No, not Burgundians, but yeah, not so much the Burgundians, but let's say the Bavarians, the Armenians, the Thirtians, the Frisians. Right. And he says that it is not the same for the laws of the Visigoths, the Lombards, and the Burgundians. Their laws lost much of their character because these people who remained in the new dwelling places lost much of their character. So what happened is these people went in those characters, brought their laws, but then what happened was they went to a different place, and therefore they changed because of the place. Well, come on, this is the same thing that happened with the Vikings who go, the Viking conquerors who conquer into England, the Vikings who go to like northern Italy, Dane law, they become part of the Anglo-Saxons. They integrate Anglo-Saxons. They're exterminated with the Anglo-Saxons. The ones who become the Normans will become big, powerful people. The Normans will conquer other places, but when they stay in France, they stay French. When they will bring France into England. The Nordic, the Viking invaders are the Rus that form the Rus, which are Russians.
Yeah.
not Russians, but also Russia, Belarus. All three, the Rus, form the basis of Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus.
Yeah.
All of these are children of these are the merging of the Viking families who settled there with the Slavs, Eastern Slavs, and they become the Rus.
Aren't also Mongols a part of this?
Mongols will come, no, the Mongols are later.
Yeah, okay. But but you could also say that Mongols will integrate into the Rus and...
No, they conquered them, and what ended up happening is the Mongols make the Rus that were conquered by the Mongols become more Mongolish.
Okay, so it's the power that is more, it is the nation that is more powerful will overcome the
people and the power of the thing.
Yeah,
and the character of the Mongols was their horde and their way they brutalized, okay? And they were powerful, warlike spirit. Their spirit was stronger. It was not that they were powerful, but their spirit was stronger. It's the strong, remember this line here, he says, the spirit becomes weak.
Mm-hmm.
It's the spirit makes the weakness of their spirit is what destroys their power and why they lose their authority. And because the weakness of the spirit becomes they're no longer tied to, in other words, they're no longer tied to who they are and what they are. The spirit, in this way, he sounds kind of like, in other words, what made the Germans was the land, was their thing. Okay, I mean, the same thing with the Prussians. Okay, the Prussia was made by Prussia, where the Prussians came from. The land, the character of the people became merged out of the land. And their character, their toughness, their root, their Ordnung, their hard work. They conquered. In Germany, the Prussians are the thing that unifies Germany, right? But does Prussia exist anymore? Come on, Prussia was this Hitler's conquest. Hitler, come on, what is Hitler?
He's Austrian.
He's an Austrian. He's not even German. He's worse than a Bavarian. Bavarians are bad enough, but he's worse than him. He's an Austrian. The worst of the worst, right? The least Germanic of the Germans. And what does Nazis do? Nazis destroy everything that was Prussia. Come on, what happens to Prussia after World War II?
It stops existing.
Where is Prussia now? Where is the majority of Prussia today? Old Prussia. Wasn't Berlin. Berlin was Brandenburg that the Prussians conquered. The heart of Prussia was where? Königsberg, then Gdansk, Danzig, Marburg, the palace, the castle, and was that big? Where's the Teutonic castle located? Right, south of Gdansk, big city south of Gdansk. This big brick palace, big fortress. Now I'm saying this is what I mean. This is the Teutonic Knights, the Prussian order. Mm-hmm. The Prussia is this. This is Prussia. This land. This is the Junkers. The landed Junkers of this. This is what made Prussia Prussia. This has been ethnically cleansed. Germany is no longer Prussia formed. It's Bavarian. It's Rhinelandish and Bavarians and Saxons. Okay. Now that's what I mean. This is what this idea of spirited of the people and how they do it, right? Now he talks about this. The kingdoms of the Burgundians do not last long enough. The Burgundians don't last long enough. For the lands of the conquered people to be greatly changed. Gunabad and Sigmund, who collected. This is Burgundians are what? These are southern. This become Italy, northern Italy. The Burgundians are very important because why they conquered what we say Milan, those part. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they will be the Lombards, right? The laws of Lombard were augmented rather than changed. Those of the Rothes were followed, but those of Gernod, Lumpud, Ratchet, and Ussard, but these did not take a new form. It was not the same for the laws of the Visigoths. Their kings recast the laws, and they recast by the clergy. In other words, therefore the Visigoths totally integrate. The Merovingian kings were indeed removed from the Salak and the Rapusian lords, what absolutely could not be in accord with Christianity. but what they left in them was their whole foundation. One cannot say this from the laws of the Visigoths. The laws of the Burgundians, those of the Visigoths, approved corporal penalties. What does a corporal penalty means?
Death.
What?
Death.
No, physical punishment of the body.
Yeah.
I can take your arm off.
Because you slept.
I can punish your body. In other words, I can tie you to a tree. I could chop your leg off. I can chop an arm off or bolt an eye out. In other words, it allowed punishments of the body.
Right.
This was allowed under this. These were not acceptable by Salic and Rapation law. These laws were better preserved their character. The Burgundians and Visigoths, whose provinces were quite vulnerable, sought to reconcile the original inhabitants to them and given inhabitants with the most impartial civil laws. But the Frankish kings, sure of their power, were not so considerate. The Saxons, who lived under the empire of the Franks, were in indomitable humor and persisted in rebellion. And their law, one finds the harshness of the conquerors, which does not see in the codes of the laws of the other barbarians. So the Saxon law, because they were rebelling at times, the Franks who kept on crushing them, imposed the harshest of laws. Okay, the spirit of the laws of the German is seen in pecuniary crime penalties. Okay, these pecuniary means. That's a weary word. That means small things, right? And that of the conquerors and the corporal penalties. Pecuniary means money. Mm-hmm. And the laws of the Germans see in their money penalties, and that of the conquerors and their corporal penalties. The crimes they commit in their country are punishable corporally. In the spirit of the German laws, it is followed only in the punishment of those committed outside the territory. So that, in other words, that's really weird. That's the difference in that sense. In the laws, it is declared that for their crimes they will never have peace and will be refused asylum even in churches. Bishops had immense authority in the courts of the Visigoth kings, and most important business was decided in council. We owe to the codes of the Visigoths all the maxims, all the principles, and all the views of present day's inquisitors. The Inquisition is the Visigoths. For the monks have only copied against the Jews laws formerly made by the bishops. So the Inquisition laws against the Jews were simply the same rules the bishops had against ruling over the Visigoth kings. Further, the laws of the Gumban and Bulgarians appear even more so. So those are the laws of the Visigoths and the Shundians and the Agera are childish, awkward, and inane. They do not attain their ends. They are rhetorical in empty sense, fundamentally frivolous. In other words, these kind of laws over here are kind of like, these laws of the Visigoths and these people are just childish, awkward, and inane, and they're very rhetorical, empty in sense, fundamentally frivolous, and gigantic. And so how he introduces this. Now, he goes, the laws of the barbarians were all personal. So all the times you're talking about these Germanic barbarians, right? It's all about personal, about the connection of personal relationships. In other words, and he says that I find, this is that line here. This is the second paragraph into the chapter. I find the origin of this in the Moors of the Germanic people. These nations are divided by marshes, lakes, and forest. One can see in Caesar that they even liked their separation. The fright that the Romans gave made them band together. Each man in this mixture of nations had to be judged by the usages and customs of his own nation. All these people taken individually were free and independent, and when they mixed together, they remained independent. The homeland was in common, and the republic was particular. The territory was the same, and the nations various. Therefore, there was a spirit of personal laws among these people before they left their homes, and they took it with them in their conquests. You understand? This paragraph is essential to understand the way the German law formulated, because this describes the political culture of the Germanic tribes. That they were so, their nature was so divided, their government, their structures of themselves were so divided by marshes, lakes, and things. They only came together because of the danger of the Romans. But when they came together, they kept their individuality. And therefore they had to kind of, it was in a homeland, it was common, and in a republic in particular. The territory, the same in the nations, the people are various. It was heterogeneous. In other words, the Germanic structure was a very heterogeneous structure in a sense. One finds this usage established in the formula of Markov in the codes of laws of barbarians, especially in the laws of the Prussians and the decrees of the Merovingian kings, from which were derived the capitulatories made on the subject under the Carolingians. Children followed the laws of their father, wives of their husbands, widows returned to their own laws. Freedmen took that of their patrons. This is not all. Each man could take the law that he wanted. The Constitution of Lothar required that this choice be made public. This is how therefore I could change, in other words, this Germanic sense that, okay, I can change my law. I'm going to adopt your law, but I have to admit that I'm going to go obey your law. Okay, this idea that law and jurisdiction followed based upon choice even. Now this is why these chapters are so powerful, is that, this is why these chapters are very powerful in that sense. This is the longest chapter. 28 is going to be the huge super chapter. 45. Why this thing? It goes all through this like this. He goes how the Roman right was lost on the lands of the Franks and preserved on the rights of the Goths and Burgundians. So Rome, under the Franks, the Roman right, the Roman traditions and Roman law, kind of were subjugated under German. So Roman law, Roman practice, under the Franks became less Roman. Germanic characteristics dominated. Where in the Goths and the Burgundians, the Roman principle dominated. Okay? That is the important aspect of this. The country called today was governed under the Merovingian by Romans law, and that the Theodosian code and various laws of barbarians who lived in it. In the countries under the domain of Franks, the Salic law had been established for the Franks and the Theodosian code for the Romans. In the country under the domains of the Visigoths, the compilation of the Theodosian code made by the order of Arlec ruled disputes between Romans. The custom of nations, which Euric caused to be written down, decided those of the Visigoths. But why did the Salic law require a nearly general authority in the countries of the Franks? And why the Roman right gradually lost there, where the right, while in the domain of the Visigoths, Roman right spread and generally what? Now he says that, I say that the usage of Roman right was lost in the Franks because there was the great advantage of the Franks. A barbarian or a man living under Salic law, everyone gave up Roman right in order to live under Salic law. Only the ecclesiastics kept it, so the churchmen. In other words, the people kept German law, local law, the Frankish law, the Salic law, whereas the churchmen kept the Roman right, because they had no interest in changing. The difference in condition and ranks consisted in the amounts of the settlement, as I show elsewhere. Now, separate laws gave them settlements as favorable as those the Franks had, though and therefore they kept Roman right. It was without prejudice to them, and moreover it suited them because it was the work of the Christian emperors. On the other hand, the patrimony of the Visigoths and the Visigoths' law gave no civil advantage to the Visigoths over the Romans. The Romans had no reason to quit living under their law and live under another. So there's Romans who lived in Frankish territories, right? Because the Visigoth, the Salic law, gave so much advantage. Why am I going to keep the Roman law?
So basically the French got overpowered by the Romans, while the Germans made laws for the Romans. Well, not because that they were usually, remember, they're talking about the other tribes, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, and those people, right? Mm-hmm. And that therefore this is why those parts of France, like Burgundy,
southern France and like that. This is why they had a certain characteristic. He goes like this is later. He goes, Roman light and Gothic law were likewise maintained in the country and established by the Goths. Salical law was never accepted there. When Pippin and Charles Martel drove out the Saracen, the towns and provinces that submitted to these princes asked to preserve their laws, and this was granted. A thing which, in spite of the usage of those times, when all the laws were personal, soon made Roman right regarded as real and territorial laws in those countries. In other words, the Roman law became international law in that sense. This is proven in the edicts of Charles the Bald, given at Preachus in 864, which distinguishes the country in which one judged by Roman right and those which did not judge it. The edicts of Preachus did prove two things. First, that there was countries in which one judged according to Roman law, and others in which did not at all judge according to this law. Second, that those countries in which one judged by Roman law were precisely those in which it is still followed today, as seen to be in this similar edict. Thus, the distinction between these two countries in France under custom, thus the distinction between those countries in France under custom and those governed by written right, was already established by the time of the Edict of Pesters. I said that the beginning of the monarchy, all laws were personal. Thus, the Edict of Preachus distinguishes between the country of Roman right and those without it, by means that in the countries that were not of those of Roman right, so many people had choose to live under some of the laws of the barbarian people, that there was almost none of those parts who chose to live under Roman law, and that in those countries of Roman law, few people chose to live under the laws of the barbarian. I know well that I say new things here, but if they are true, they are quite old. What does it matter at all whether if I or Valus or the Burgundians have said Bigrons who have said them? He's saying that now he's repeating what people said, but he's also interpreting them a certain way. Now, why is this important? He goes into the whole context of how this situation emerges, this distinction of this. And he goes by case by case by case by case. He continues of the other, chapter 11, he goes of the cases of done for the codes of the barbarians of the Roman rites and capitulate. When the Germanic nations conquered the Roman Empire, they found writings in use there. And imitating the Romans, they drew up all the usages of their writings and arranged them into codes. In other words, the unfortunate rains following the reign of Charlemagne, the incursions of the Normans, and the intestine wars plunged the victorious nations back in the shadow which they left. Reading and writing were forgotten. These caused written barbarian laws, Roman right, and the capitularies forgotten in France and Germany. The use of writing was better preserved in Italy, where the popes and the Greek emperors reigned, and where they were flourishing towns, almost the only commerce of the time. The proximity of Italy caused Roman right to be better preserved in the regions of Gaul, formerly subject to the Goths and Burgundians. The more so because there this right was territorial law and a kind of privilege. It is likely that the ignorance of writing caused the decline of Visigoth law in Spain. In other words, what happened was, as the system collapsed, law, even though this Charlemagnean thing happened, well, then all these forces at play happened, and it collapsed. So there was that in Spain, the Visigoths conquer Spain, but writing is completely lost. The only thing that saves like Gaul is its closeness to Rome. Okay. Personal law declines. Sentiment and what is called frida were more regulated by custom than the text of these laws. Thus, the establishment of the monarchy, German usage passed into written law. Some centuries later, written laws returned to unwritten usages. So therefore, in other words, you understand this idea this interaction between custom, in other words, written usages, written code, customs, turned into laws, that then were contacted other laws, codes, right? Then what happened was reverted back into codes, unwritten laws. Okay? This changing of this all this time. 12 continues of local customs, revolution of laws and barbarian peoples and that of Roman, right? He talks about how this, this whole chapter goes on this question. And then he brings the whole question of Salic law. Salic law is important because why? The French will use Salic law to justify and prevent. Okay, one of the biggest disputes that will divide France will be the question of inheritance of who could become king. The Salic law prevents women's succession. Okay? There can be no women's succession. Now, when the King of France, this is a very important thing, at the time of, when is it? It starts at the reign of Edward. Was it Edward? Edward III. Edward III. Edward III, the son of Edward II, who's kind of the weaky son. Edward I is the big king. He's the Henry III is the son of John. Edward I is the great hammer of the Scots who unifies, conquers Scotland but also loses it. He conquers Scotland completely. His son loses it. His son is killed by his wife. She basically tries to run the country. Then what happens is a coup against her, and her son the church becomes the guardian of him, the son. The son finally will take control, Henry III. Henry will be a successful king, but his son, Edward I, will be the big successful. Edward is. Henry III is the king I'm talking about. Edward III. Edward III is the son of Edward. The son of Edward II. The queen, the mother, Isabella, tries to rule. She and her lover is prevented from ruling by a cop. The son becomes king on his own, and then he takes over and fights removes the mother totally from power, centralizes control, and Edward III is the greatest king. He will have the biggest law. It is under his law that English law becomes totally formalized. It starts earlier, before John's father, Henry II, starts the reform of law. But by Edward III, everything before Edward III is considered ancient law. And then from therefore the formal codification of the establishment of precedent and rules becomes this. Okay, it establishes the beginning of the jury systems, the court structures, the independence of the English system. Edward III is important because Edward III will make when the French king dies, the dynasty, his mother is the daughter of the French king. In other words, Edward II marries the daughter of the King of France. Her brother dies. There's no other succession. So the French aristocrats choose another dynasty to be king. Well, but he should have inherited. The argument why they exclude him, Edward III, will be, you are not, the Salic law prevents the succession of a woman.
Even though there's another heir from that woman.
Yep. No succession from women. Okay. Only therefore that's why he is a different outsider, so we're gonna elect him. Even though that there's a connection, but it's from a woman, and therefore it's not valid. They insist on Salic law, even though by this time the French code has no Salic law. Okay, they revert to Salic law. That's why Salic law. This is why he has this big account. Why is this important? Because come on, this will be the thing that fights Europe. This will start the 100-Year War between England and France. The 100-Year War. That the English, remember, at this time, the King of England is the biggest holder of land. Okay, Richard Henry II and his wife Aquitaine. Remember, he is Duke of Normandy. He's Duke of Agen. So he has two territories, two large. Normandy is his. Agen, which is Anjou, that's his. He's from that thing. He's from the sign there. Then what else? He marries the Aquitaine. That's all southern France. So he owns, the King of England controls nearly half of France, 1/3 of France.
The English king controls.
Because he's also Duke of Normandy, he's Duke of Anjou, and he's Duke of Aquitaine. In other words, he's all three of these things. He holds all his title. And what happens with Rich Henry? Now he'll lose the Aquitaine, because that's when John will lose almost everything. He'll lose Normandy. He will lose everything. But Henry still has the claim that he's French king. So he demands his rights to Normandy. He declares his rights back to Green Normandy and French lands. He and his sons will wage war. Edward III will have like 6 sons. All of them. The famous one is John of Gaunt, and his first son, the Black Prince of Edward, the Black Prince of Wales. He will. These are brilliant military tacticians, and also the British are better because they have an advantage, military advantage. The longbow. It's a democratic army. The English always have had trust of the people, and because of that, the French aristocrats don't trust the peasants and the yeomen. So therefore, only the aristocrats have the crossbow. The crossbow has less power. A crossbow bolt cannot penetrate armor. A longbow bolt can penetrate armor.
Weren't also crossbows deemed unholy by the Pope?
No, that was the Islamic rulers declared that.
I think the Pope also declared crossbows.
Yeah, but that was undone because they don't trust them. They didn't want the longbow scared. The longbow scared. Because if the educated peasants could train the longbow, this could destroy the armed aristocracy. The English monarchy always had better relationships. The English aristocracy was more decentralized than it was unified under the crown. Therefore, it would always be loyal to the crown. But the English crown always used the thing to decentralize power to keep control over his centralized realm. So he could remove his aristocrats because they owned total allegiance to him, and all property reverts to the English crown. So therefore, the England was centralized rule, and then his territorial rule elsewhere allowed him to do this. So Edward was able to marshal big armies to constantly defeat the French. They capture the French king, and they force a peace treaty, which he doesn't. He says, "Okay, you can be king, but you're paying me everything." He accepts a big payment because he has to deal with the French, he has to deal with the Scots, and he has to deal with the Irish. He has an Irish problem, and because he didn't take control of Ireland. It will only be the English ruler who totally crushes Ireland is who? Cromwell.
Right.
Cromwell will unify all England. Okay, and crush Ireland completely. So what does this teach us? And then after Cromwell, the next one who crushes it will be William of Orange, William III, the Orangeman. That's why the Irish flag is orange and green, right? The orange color is the Protestant color. Remember that. So therefore, this is the way of the English Constitution and the structure. And this is why you have to understand this political reality of what he's saying here. That's why this chapter this book is important, because it gives you the fundamental understanding of how Saxon law emerges as a compromise in order to why it does it. It becomes important for defining French monarchy. It defines the French monarchy. The Salic law ensures that why? Come on, it will be used to deny Henry V will conquer. No, if if Edward III didn't conquer the first time, Henry V, Henry V is a weird situation. He is a descent. He's like a great grandson. He is descended one of the brothers. He's John of Gaunt, the second brother to Edward. Edward dies, but Edward has a son, Richard II. Richard is a fancy boy. He's a disastrous king. In fact, he seizes property. John Galt's son comes back and removes him as king and puts himself as king, and he becomes Henry IV. His son, Henry V, will conquer France and marry another French queen. Becoming king, his son will become king of France. But Henry V dies before his infant son becomes king. As a very infant child, very young, a 1-year-old baby becomes king of England because Henry dies. What happens? Henry V's brothers run. One runs England, one runs France. And what happens? The division caused problems. This rises the problem of the way the fighting with the English. There's no agreement about this. There's no how to do this. The king is a nobody baby and not this. What ends up happening creates a problem of the rise of a thing called, what's her name? Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc and the peasants revolt against the English lords. She crowns the son of the Dauphin, the son of the French king, the previous French king, to be King Charles. He gives her to the French. The Burgundians burn her. The Burgundians are basically supporting England, but once they get her killed, they switch sides with Charles, and Charles then unifies this and kicks the English out, right? And then because the boy king is lose England, then what happens? The English war between the other family comes in there, the Yorkists. This is Shakespeare's history plays. Okay. Then what happens is Henry VI is an idiot, like his great grandfather Richard II. Then what happens? York becomes promised to be king, but then the French queen kills. The French queen, who's a monster, kills Duke of York. Duke of York's 3 sons wage war on the king. They win. The king, then he becomes Henry the. He becomes Edward the Fourth. Edward the Fourth. Then what happens is that instead of marrying the French queen as Warwick wanted, he marries another English noblewoman who was part of the other side. This pissed off Warwick and brings back the Henry IV back as king. Henry IV is back as king for a short time. Then, with the help of Clarence, the brother of the king of Edward IV, then what happened was Clarence changes side and Richard kills Warwick. Richard kills the Prince of Wales, the young Prince of Wales, and Richard then kills King Edward Edward VI. Henry VI. Okay, and then he does what? He kills his brother Clarence. Then his brother dies. Edward IV has a young son Edward with Elizabeth. Richard becomes guardian, declares the child a bastard. Child and his brother disappear. Richard III emerges. And then with Richard III, what happens is this guy named Tudor comes with the support of the other side, and he becomes Henry Tudor comes with an army with not a French army, but an exile army, defeats Richard III. I forget the name of the battle place, but then what happens? The Tudor dynasty. Then it becomes Henry. Now this is important. What is time? When is Montesquieu writing? Montesquieu is writing after the English Civil Wars. So that's the Tudor regime has ended. The Tudor regime unified and strengthened England under English disrule, gave it a great gave it a great empire, great trading thing, colonies elsewhere. Then the English Civil War happens. Then Stuart kings, James I, Charles II, then Cromwell, then Charles II, and James II. And then what happens? The Second English Civil War, that is of the Glorious Revolution. Which then, what happens is that James II, the brother of Charles II, the sons of Charles, who got his head chopped off by the English crown. The English killed their king first. Okay, chopped their head off and had a revolution first. The English had a revolution before the French did, and they went back to monarchy. Okay. Then what happened was that the second revolution was the parliamentary revolution, and that's when Montesquieu's writing. Montesquieu's writing after the demise of the Glorious Revolution, after the reign of William and Mary, and then the reign of Anne, Queen Anne. And then the Germans come in. The Germans, the Hanoverians, who was descended from Charles Stuart's son, James I's granddaughter, who marries the Hanoverian line. Sophia, the line of Sophia of Stuart, becomes and therefore the son of Sophia becomes George I, the Elector of Hanover. And that becomes the line. George I, George II, George III. Then George III has his son, George IV, but then George IV have no children. Now, George I and George II speak no English. George III is the first English king that speaks, the first Hanoverian king that speaks English. Then our friend, so where is Montesquieu writing? Between the reigns of George I and George II. Okay, that's the England of his time, 1700s. The early 1700s, the reign of Queen Anne, the unification of Scotland and England under that. All these things. That's why this chapter is a huge chapter about Salic law. That's why you have to spend, because this defines the French monarchy. Because remember, the French monarchy is all about the problems. It is about the English claim, right? The English claim, that's one claim. The other claim is, my God, who is the French king? The French king is not really a king, and the English king is clear. It's the conquest. After the conquest, there's no problem. It's only dynastic, the question of proper lineage. The French king, every major power can be French king. So then, therefore, the Valois, this will be the big problem of the French monarchy. The French monarchy is not as unified or strengthened as them. It was under Charles and the creation of a large army under the peasants that allowed it. But then even after that, he lost it. And it would be the loss of the Valois, that monarchy would then give us what? The religious wars that divided France. The wars between the Protestants and the Catholics, which then led to what? The assassination. First, it led to the Bartholomew Day massacre when Elizabeth is English queen. The Bartholomew Day massacre, where the French decide to kill their Protestants. And then what happens? She, the woman who caused the massacre, and her son poisons her own son by accident because they're trying to kill the king of Navarre. They poison him wrongly. They try to kill him, but the son reads the book that's filled with poison, and he's touching, you touch it, and he kills himself by the poison on the pages. He bleeds out. Then this is why his brother, who is technically king of Poland, runs back to France to become king, but he doesn't have any children, so he makes the king of Navarre Henry IV. And Henry's a Protestant. He converts to Catholicism because Paris is worse than Mass, and he becomes the French. This is the what? The Bourbon monarchy. the Bourbons, the creation of the Bourbon dynasty. It's with the Bourbons, with Henry IV, you have this over-increasing centralization. And this is what it is with the rise of the Bourbon monarchy, that only then, and particularly following Louis XIV, right? Remember, Henry IV is assassinated. His son, Louis the 13th, gets there. But then Louis XIII is basically governed by two Catholic bishops, cardinals.
Because he was too young.
He's too young, so therefore he was still king. But even while he was king, older king, the Cardinal Richelieu and Cardinal Mazarin governed.
And didn't they split up?
No. Then what happened was they created Louis. Louis was under the education of Cardinal Mazarin, and then Louis gets control of everything. Louis XIV, the Sun King, and his success was centralizing everything in Versailles. What he did was he seduced all the aristocracy to come to Versailles, and therefore he gained power he got all the barons to give. He got all the dukes and all the big aristocrats, magnates, to give him everything. For what? To enjoy Versailles, to be my toilet person, to enjoy the pleasures of Versailles. You understand? This is why the question of the French monarchy and the French state is why he is trying to explain why, and this is irony, that the French, the English, the real secret is he thinks the English monarchy is better. Why? It's a republican monarchy. The French monarchy, he says, it's monarchical, but it's really, maybe it's a despotism. It relies on honor, right? Honor. The honor is the only thing that prevents the system from becoming despotic. And its size. In other words, what prevents the love of honor, and that becomes, and therefore it's the French code and the French law, this mores, the culture of the Franks, will be this interaction between a Gallic people with Germanic culture, this interaction between these two things, and their different mores, produces the framework of which the land structure, fiefs, how lands are done, how structures are done, all this stuff is the way that does this, right? And this leads us to this horrible chapter, which is what? This is the shocking chapter. Okay, the last 30 and 21, this is the theory of laws in relation to the creation of the monarchy. So book 30 is the monarchy, right? He defines the monarchy. We're almost out of time. 31 is the theory of the feudal laws among the revolutions of the monarchy, how the monarchy changes, right? And this is about the laws. This is why these two books are very interesting. Book 30 has 25 chapters, and book 34 have 26. The 29 is the most important one. Why? Because this is a short one. This is actually the longest thing. Every one is about no more than 4 it was everything is like 2 or 3 paragraphs. It's 19 chapters. Most are just one paragraph thing. Majority is one paragraph. There is chapter 16 has 24 paragraphs, and then the next one I think has 8 paragraphs, 13. This is what? On how you make laws. Wait a minute. Why isn't this earlier? Remember we talked about we had this weird thing in 15. What should have been this discussion, the last book of this should have been maybe right in the beginning, right? Earlier this today. Book 26 really should have been. This should have been this discussion about natural law and all that stuff. This should have been up there with book 1, right? Then all of a sudden we got this wonderful book in the middle here, which is out of order. Why in the middle of this history about the French monarchy, we get this book that really talks about law in general? It hides it right in the middle. This it's not that long, it's very short. About what? About, how do you make laws? The spirit of the legislator. How do you make laws?
So why is it so far down?
Yeah, why is it hidden? It's weird. This is like, Now, because why? I say that it seems to me this. I have written this work only to prove it, that the spirit of moderation should be that of the legislature. The political good, like the moral good, is always found between two limits. Here, the example he gives us, right? This liberty in this. Citizens lose their liberty and their security. Accusers would no longer have the means to convict the accused and means to vindicate themselves. And then he has this line. This is that the same continuation. He gives the example of this. Cicero, according to speaking of the laws of the 12 tables that permitted a creditor to cut the insolent debtors to pieces, justifies the laws by its very atrocity, which prevented one borrowing against one's abilities. Shall the cruelest laws therefore be the best? Shall the excess of the good and the relation between things all destroyed? He says, no, that's kind of silly. He goes, the laws which seem to diverge from the aims of the legislatures that often conform to them. Therefore, things that seem to diverge from the intention of the law are really conform to them. He talks about Solon declared infamous all those who took no part in sedition. Had appeared extraordinary, but one must attend the circumstances of Greece at the time, right? So seditious quarrels in 3 small states, the bulk of the town entered in the quarrels, or began it. And in our great monarchies, the parties formed are few. So therefore, the reason why Solon made this rule that if there's going to be a conspiracy, if you didn't partake in it, okay, then you have to be punished. In other words, you have to join the conspiracy. Why? Because everyone has to join it. Everything's so small, and therefore, for conspiracies to work, or the fact would have to be large enough, a significant proportion of the society in a small republic. In a big kingdom, changes happen because few people. So you can't demand the same rule there. It would become, in other words, this makes sense. Solon's law makes sense in a small republic. It would not make sense here. And he says here, the laws that run counter to the aims of the legislature. There are laws that the legislature had understood so poorly that they are even contrary to the ends he had proposed. Those who establish for the French that when they have to make 2 claimants to benefice dies, the benefice remains with the survivor. Doubtless he ought to quell the dispute. But a contrary effect results. One sees ecclesiastics, like mastiffs, attack each other and fight to the death, in other words. And again, this is the same subject about this, how bad laws, in other words, the law makes a bad law that runs contrary to the situation. Laws that appear to have the same, the laws that appear the same do not always have the same effect, right? And he gives a chapter of this about example from Caesar. Caesar forbade men to keep more than 60 sestertians in a house. In Rome, this law was regarded as quite proper for reconciled debtors and creditors, but obliging the wealthy to lend to the poor, but in the latter in a position of satisfy the wealthy. The similar made by France at times of the system was catastrophic. So what looks like the same, a law that looks the same in different situations may have different effects. Mm-hmm. And likewise, the continuation of this, but the stories about the laws of Athens and like this. In chapter 8, about laws that appear not always have the same motive, the different, again, things that have laws that look similar but the motives are different. Okay, he continues there. He goes to different Roman law. He keeps on going through here. Now, what is the chapter? This is again the way 2 different laws can be compared. He compares in France. This is one. In France, the penalty for false witness is capital. So for penalty for false witness is a capital crime. You're dead. In England, it is not. In order to judge which of these 2 is better, one must add that in France, criminals are put to the question. Okay? You know what the question means? Put to the question means tortured.
Wasn't it that they heat up a bar of metal and it...
Or some device that question physical pain. They were put to the question. Okay? And in France, criminals are put to the question. In England, they're not. And one must say that in France, the accused does not produce his own witness. And it is very rare to admit that what are called mitigating circumstances, that in England one receives testimony from both parties. The three French laws form a well-linked, consistent system. The 3 English laws form one that is no less so. The English law, which does not admit putting criminals to the question, has only slight exceptions of drawing from the accused a confession of his crime. It summons outside testimony from every quarter. It does not dare discourage them by the fear of capital penalty. The French law, which has the additional recourse, does not greatly fear intimidating the witness. On the contrary, reason demands that it intimidates them. The law hears the witness of only one side only. Okay. In other words, French law, only one side. The prosecution gives witnesses. England, both sides can provide witnesses. They are those produced by the public party, and the fate of the accused depends on the testimony alone. But in England, one accepts witnesses from both sides, and the business, so to speak, argued out between them. Therefore, false witnesses can be less dangerous there. The accused has a recourse against false witness, whereas the French gives none. Thus, in order to judge which of these laws have in more conformity with reason, they must not be compared one by one. They must be taken. So, the French law, which seems ridiculous and horrible, right, makes sense in the French situation because there's only one side of territory. Only the prosecution gives witnesses. So, therefore, if the witnesses perjure themselves, you need to punish them by great penalty. Also, prisoners are tortured to get confessions. So therefore, in other words, English doesn't do that. So therefore, the different laws are done differently. So therefore, what makes sense? The punishment of perjury, but the penalty for false witness in here, not perjury, false witness, which is kind of perjury, is capital in France. Because who's the only witness? It's the witness from the prosecution.
Yes, but how? But if there is only one persecutor that, for example, can lie.
But the judge catches the lie?
I mean, if the judge catches
and the penalty of lie, what?
Then he's dead.
No, the judge does not catch the lie. If the judge catches the lie, then the liar is dead. Therefore, are you going to risk the judge catching the lie?
But at the same time,
this assumes that the judge if the judge is in cahoots with the prosecutor, then it's a ruthless system.
Yeah, because the one that is persecuted is done for.
Yeah, it's done for.
No way of defending himself.
Exactly. But then he's also tortured first. He confesses his crime.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
You understand?
Confesses.
Well,
I mean, he could be innocent by.
Innocent. Exactly. That's true too. Exactly. That's what I mean. The law is worse, but the reason why you have the law, the purpose of the law is to actually make sense.
It does, but
only makes sense in the French context.
Yes.
In the English context, it would make no sense.
Yes.
You can't understand. In other words, you're comparing these laws. You can say the English is better because it doesn't do those bad things. But the reason for the punishment, you wouldn't say
it's kind of like the problem is that.
In other words, it would be worse if the penalty for lying was nothing.
Nothing.
Then the French system is even worse.
Yeah.
You understand?
But if a person is hell bent to get another person screwed over, then if they lie and they get away with it, that's their.
Now this is why this interesting thing. 13 is the longest chapter here. In other words, 13 is one of 8, second longest chapter in the book, 8 paragraphs. It's about robbery, Roman laws of robbery. You know what the Romans did with robbers? Come on.
They cut their hands off.
Or no, they put them in bags and they threw them in river with animals. In other words, that the manifest robbers of this, there was the value, they would punish them or only paying twice the value of the stolen thing. The different laws at different times of this. Among the Romans, a slave who had robbed, thrown off the Tapian lock, and the question was of a Lacedaemonian institution. The laws of Lycurgus on robbery had not been made for slaves. Deviating from them was on the point of fouls. So the Roman law is very strange in this regard, that the Romans wanted to do things. The Romans wanted to separate things. There were the 12 tables. He goes to the laws like this. In other words, he goes back to Roman law, the institutions. Now we get chapter 16, which is the law. No, it's not. 17 is the next one. And this is one of these long ones. No. What is it? It's 16 is a long one. It's 24 paragraphs. I'm not going to read it all. This is the French. This is all about the French. This is all about what Cardinal Richelieu, the Honorius, the Charles VII, the way they did it. Then he goes back to the Roman Justinian law, and then goes back against to Charles IX, and then went all the way back to the introduction of the Roman law to the French law. And this is about the Jews. Like this, ultimately, one of the big problems is the Prince of in the prescription of the Prince of Orange, Philip II promised to give to one who killed him or to his heirs 25,000 ukurs in nobility, and the word of the king and as the servant of God. Nobility promised for such an action ordered in one's capacity as a servant of God. All the upsets the equality of the ideas of honor, those of morality, and those of religion. It is where that one must prohibit something that is not bad on the pretense of an imagined perfection. There must be a certain candor in the laws, made to punish the wickedness of men. They should have the greatest innocence themselves. One can see that the laws of the Visigoths that ridiculed requirements by which the Jews were obliged to eat everything accompanied with pork, but not the pork itself. This was a great cruelty. They were subjected to the laws contrary to their own. They were allowed to keep their own, only that which could be a sign by which they could be recognized. In other words, they do all these things the Burgundians did to them. He ends this whole chapter on this line, the last two things. But he ends the chapter on law, this conformity, on legislators, right? Aristotle sometimes wanted to satisfy his jealousy of Plato, sometimes his passion for Alexander. Plato was indignant at the tyranny of the people of Athens. Machiavelli was full of his idol, Duke Valentino. Thomas More, who spoke rather of what he had read than what he had thought, wanted to govern all states with the simplicity of a Greek town. Harrington saw only the Republic of England, while a crowd of writers found disorder wherever they did not see a crown. The laws always meet passions and prejudices of the legislatures. Sometimes they pass through and are colored. Sometimes they remain there and are incorporated. That's how he ends this on this weird thing that the lawgivers and those who do it often will do their prejudices and their things. And the problem here is sometimes they will look at things. He gives these examples of these people and how they saw things, these prejudices they had. The laws always meet the passions and prejudices of the legislature. Sometimes they pass through and are colored. Sometimes they remain there and incorporated into the things. So therefore, this is how he ends the thing. And I'm going to stop here because these laws are just, like I said, continuation of what was talked about here about the way the French laws of this. With this, we are done. And I will have to upload this and do this and send it to everyone. So, okie dokie.